Have you visited the site?
No, I have not.
Which boggles my mind. A former president of the United States almost has his head blown off on your watch at a campaign rally with more than 3 months and God only knows how many more campaign events to go before an election, and she didn't go to the site to learn firsthand what went wrong? As the person in charge, she should have been on the first plane to Butler, Pennsylvania.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 297th episode of the listener-supporting Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And this is an episode that I have turned around as fast as possible because there have been so many requests for this, which is understandable because the ex-president of the United States, Donald Trump, was damn near almost shot in the face. And so there were 3 hearings that took place about that insane event this week. The first hearing took place on Monday, and that was a hearing with the director of the Secret Service. The second hearing took place on Tuesday, and that was a hearing with the Pennsylvania local police. And then the third hearing took place on Wednesday, and that was a hearing with the FBI director, Christopher Wray. So it was boom, 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 3 hearings. And watching all of them took approximately 15 hours, and no one has time for that. And so today I'm taking the most informative information from all 3 of the hearings and stitching it all together so that you can hear the facts for yourself without having to listen to member of Congress after member of Congress ask questions that have already been answered or having to listen to their insufferable 5 minutes of political preaching. This episode has just the good stuff. And if you appreciate being able to hear this testimony with all of the insufferable parts cut out, please support Congressional Dish financially. You can do it per episode on Patreon, which we really love, or monthly via PayPal, which we also really love. Or you can pay whatever you think is fair for this episode on Zelle or Venmo or by sending a check. We have lots of options, and they are all listed for you in this episode's show notes, along with links to the full hearings and all of the sources that we use to create this episode. We do that for every episode. But also, please share this episode with anyone else who is interested in the attempted assassination of ex and possibly future President Donald Trump. Because while there are still some questions, I know that I learned a lot from watching these hearings, including that some of what I thought I knew was bullshit. And so help me combat the bullshit by sharing this episode as widely as you can. But for anyone who has been in a coma for the last 2 weeks, on July 13th, at a rally that took place at the Butler Farm Showground, which is essentially a field surrounded by buildings in Butler, Pennsylvania, former President Trump was speaking on a stage in front of a large crowd when a 20-year-old loser named Thomas Matthew Crooks, using an AR-15 rifle, a gun known for being a favorite of American mass murderers, Crooks aimed and shot at former President Trump's head. Here's how Chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Representative James Comer of Kentucky, described what happened as he opened his hearing on Monday, July 22nd.
A little over a week ago, Americans watched in horror as a shooter attempted to assassinate President Donald J. Trump at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The gunman nearly succeeded. The bullet that struck President Trump's head was less than an inch from taking his life. President Trump survived, but one rallygoer, Corey Comparator, tragically did not. 2 others were seriously injured. It was a horrifying moment in American history.
And for the record, with that, I 100% agree. It's no secret that I don't like Donald Trump, especially because of his attempts, which are well documented on this very podcast, to fake 7 election certifications and to have those documents say that he won 7 states that he actually lost, and then submit those documents as official to the government. That's fraud, that's criminal, and I never want him to be president again because of it. But I also don't want him to be shot in the head. And I'm disappointed that anyone would think that their, oh, too bad the shooter missed jokes would land on me. Please know that they didn't. And I want to know exactly what happened that day so that it can't happen again, regardless of who is being protected. But in this case, it's crystal clear that the law enforcement body that was responsible for Donald Trump's safety that day was the U.S. Secret Service. And the director of the Secret Service was the first witness to answer questions posed by Congress on Monday, July 22nd. Here's Chairman Comer with an introduction.
Today we are joined by Kimberly Cheadle, who was sworn into office on September 17, 2022 as the Director of the United States Secret Service. Prior to her appointment, Director Cheadle was Senior Director of Global Security at PepsiCo. Before her role at Pepsi, she served 27 years in the Secret Service.
And Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle had this to say about the Secret Service's job performance.
The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed. As a director of the United States Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse of our agency. We are fully cooperating with ongoing investigations. We must learn what happened, and I will move heaven and earth to ensure that an incident like July 13th does not happen again. Let me state unequivocally, nothing I have said should be interpreted to place blame for this failure on our federal, state, or local law enforcement partners who supported the Secret Service in Butler. We could not do our job without them.
This was the Secret Service's fault. Full stop. And on this, everyone seems to agree, even though there were other law enforcement agencies who had key players in the failures that day. Here's why that is considered a basic fact. Here's Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania speaking to Director Kimberly Cheadle.
When there are so many teams that are collaborating, who takes the lead and how is that determined?
The Secret Service is responsible for the security of the site and the coordination.
And that was the case on July 13th?
Correct.
And so here's what I now know about the Secret Service's plan for security and coordination in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th. First of all, I find it fascinating that the site for the rally was picked with no input or permission from the local authorities required. Here's Representative Benny Thompson speaking in the House Committee on Homeland Security on Tuesday, July 23rd.
Butler, Pennsylvania has no permitting process for events of that size. So you can announce it and hold it, and local government doesn't really have anything to do with it. And we were assured by local government that they would try to fix that. That they said we have to be more involved in events of this size, so that if this was not the best venue, then that permitting could have gotten engaged and suggested an alternate venue.
And I think that's relevant because the site that they picked did seem to be especially vulnerable. There's a BBC article in the show notes for you which has a diagram of this. But if you look at the Butler Farms location, it's a field surrounded by buildings. It wasn't an open field at all. And so the Secret Service had set up a secure perimeter, which required all attendees to go through a security check before entering. But the size of the perimeter and how that was decided was a key topic of conversation because it did seem inappropriately small. Here's Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York speaking to Secret Service Director Cheadle.
Director Cheadle, is there a standard perimeter that the Secret Service establishes around an event, or are those perimeters independently determined per event and scenario?
There is no standard. Every event and every venue is different and treated as such.
So each event has a different perimeter that is established depending on the logistics of that event. Now, you established earlier that the building upon which the shooter operated from was outside of that established perimeter, correct, for the Butler, Pennsylvania event?
It was outside of our secure perimeter, yes.
Now, that building was, I believe, 500. How far away was that building from the president?
It was approximately 200 yards.
200 yards. Now, the individual used an AR-15 in order to act out his assassination attempt. An AR-15 has a range of about 400 to 600 yards. My question is, why does the Secret Service perimeter, why is the Secret Service protective perimeter shorter than one of the most popular semi-automatic weapons in the United States?
There are a number of weapons out there with a number of ranges. Again, an advance was completed. The determination of the perimeter, I'm not going to speak to specifics, but there are a number of factors that are taken into account when we determine our perimeter. Some of it has to do with terrain, some of it has to do with buildings, some of it has to do with assets and resources that are available.
And so what I'm hearing is that a perimeter was not established outdoors in an outdoor venue that would prevent an AR-15, which is one of the most common weapons used in mass shootings, from being able to be within the range of Secret Service protection.
A perimeter was established, and even though there were buildings that were outside of that perimeter, it wasn't just that building. There were a number of buildings in the area, and there was overwatch that was created to help mitigate some of those buildings.
And here's Representative Dan Goldman of New York following up on that statement.
Overwatch meaning from other counter sniper, other higher points?
Correct.
But whatever overwatch Secret Service Director Cheadle was referring to, it definitely wasn't from the highest point on the Butler Farm site. We know this because Representative Eli Crane of Arizona flew, along with other members of the House Homeland Security Committee, out to Butler, Pennsylvania last weekend to see the site of the rally and the shooting for themselves. In this next clip, he will be questioning Colonel Christopher Paris, who is the commissioner of the Pennsylvania State Police. But here's an introduction to Colonel Paris from Representative Mark Green of Tennessee.
Colonel Christopher Paris serves as the Commissioner for the Pennsylvania State Police. In this role, he exercises command, administrative, and fiscal authority over the Pennsylvania State Police, the 10th largest police agency in the United States. Commissioner Paris has served in the Pennsylvania State Police since his enlistment in 1999.
And here are his answers to questions posed by Representative Eli Crane of Arizona, who again personally visited the site and took videos that were used in the hearing.
Now that you've had a chance to go back and look over it, what is the tallest structure on that site?
The water tower, sir.
Absolutely. Colonel, do you know how far the water tower was from the roof where the shooter took his shots?
I do not.
160 yards, sir. Who made the decision, Colonel, not to put a counter-sniper team on the tallest structure by far on the site with 360-degree surveillance? Do you have any idea?
I do not know, sir.
Okay. We'd like to get that answer.
And looking at the pictures and videos that Representative Crane took, it does seem like even having someone unarmed but watching from the water tower would have been a really smart move, because you can see the entire property from up there. It's the only place that seems to have true overwatch capabilities, and yet no one was up there to see the skinny kid who brought a gun to the top of the so-called AGR building. And when preparing for the rally, there were plans in place for having security in and around that AGR building. Here's Colonel Paris of the Pennsylvania State Police, or PSP as he refers to it, speaking to Representative Mark Green of Tennessee.
The final walkthrough occurred on the 11th. Present at that meeting were the two commanders that were tasked with both staffing the security checkpoints on the interior of the secure perimeter, as well as the commander who was going to be in charge of the motorcade. But in addition to that, a PSP area commander was on that walkthrough, holding the rank of major.
Could you share a little bit of insight? I appreciate the timeline, but could you share a little bit, because I only have about a minute.
I apologize.
Yeah, the specific to the AGR building.
So on that walkthrough, our area commander asked specifically who was responsible for the AGR building, and we were told that Butler ESU was responsible for that area by several Secret Service agents on that walkthrough.
And for more on the security of the AGR building, here's Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina questioning Colonel Paris.
Colonel Paris, are you aware whether any law enforcement officer or officers was or were posted in the second floor window of the AGR building?
I am aware, yes, sir.
And what is the answer?
To my knowledge, there were two posted there from Butler ESU.
And you said Butler ESU. What does the acronym ESU stand for?
Emergency Services Unit. It's a team that's comprised of multiple agencies that pool resources on a county or several county basis in order to enhance capabilities and training and be able to respond. Basically, a mutual aid agreement is my understanding of it.
Is it sort of like a SWAT team?
They are trained in SWAT tactics, to my knowledge.
So how many ESU officers were posted to that second floor window?
So I am aware that 2 were in the building, but again, I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan.
Do you know, well, you say in the building, were they in a window, where a window out onto the scene?
From briefings that I have been given, I was told they were in a window, yes, sir.
So a Barney Fife SWAT team of local police was put in charge of the building that the shooter used. It wasn't left unattended. And just to help you picture this, because I've studied the diagrams, the building that the shooter used was in the front of like a complex of buildings. And so the windows that these Butler ESU agents were watching from were behind that building, giving them a direct view of the entire roof that the shooter used. But anyway, since it wasn't staffed by Secret Service, I was wondering, how did Secret Service coordinate all of these different teams? Like, how were they communicating with one another? Well, here's Colonel Paris speaking to Representative Morgan Luttrell of Texas.
I'm aware of 3 radio systems in operation, PSPs, the Secret Service, and Butler counties.
All communicating on different channels.
Technically, yes, but the integration occurs, I can only speak from PSP, our integration occurs by us having somebody inside of the Secret Service command post. Again, for an incident of this magnitude, in theory, the more people you have on the same channel, if there was a medical emergency or lost 6-year-old and everybody keys up at once, it paralyzes your communication.
So they had a physical person in the office with the Secret Service agents, and that's how they were communicating with each other, which was confirmed as the actual plan created by the Secret Service director. They were essentially playing a game of interagency telephone. Here's Secret Service Director Cheadle answering the questions posed by Representative Russell Fry of South Carolina.
There are a number of other agencies that provide assistance to the Secret Service during campaigns. We utilize personnel from the Department of Homeland Security. We utilize personnel from the Department of Defense, and we utilize local law enforcement partners.
Are you on the same radios? Do you provide the radios to all the assets that are taking part in protection of an event?
We provide radios to the personnel from the Department of Homeland Security that are assisting us.
But not local law enforcement?
Local law enforcement is working on their own radios.
Are you on the same frequency?
We ensure that we have counterparts in the security room, and so the local law enforcement will place one of their personnel in the security room with our personnel so that we have interoperability communications.
That's not interoperability communications. That's mind-blowing to me, that the plan was to have different parts of the security team on different communications networks and then have information passed through a human hub in an office somewhere. Clearly, the Secret Service, during their preparation for this event, came up with the fastest possible way to communicate urgent information in 2024, when we all have computers in our pockets. And finally, since there's been a lot of speculation about this, the Secret Service did also give some answers about their personnel assigned to protect Donald Trump that day. So first, here's Representative Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin questioning Secret Service Director Cheadle.
Were President Trump's normal agents normally assigned to him there that day?
Yes.
There was these were the same agents that were always there?
Yes, sir. The people that are assigned to his detail were working on that day.
And here's Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland questioning Secret Service Director Cheadle.
Did you deny a request for additional resources that had been made by the Trump campaign?
There were no assets denied for that event in Butler on the 13th.
I see. So you're saying there were requests made for additional assistance for other specific events rather than for the campaign as a whole. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Well, you seem to say that there were not additional resources requested for that event. And forgive me for being unfamiliar with this. Is it requested event by event, or is it requested just in general for the campaign?
So if I can explain the advance process, when an event or a venue is identified by, in this case, campaign staff, then the campaign staff works together with Secret Service agents who go out and conduct an advance. Generally, that is a 5-day time period where those discussions are had about what the perimeter is going to look like, what the size of the event is, what the venue is, and then from there, there is a request made to mitigate potential risk and threat. And I'm saying that on that day, the requests that were pushed forward were granted.
So Secret Service is saying that they gave the Trump campaign everything they asked for on July 13th. But there were and still are extra threats to Donald Trump right now because of his decision as president to assassinate foreign leaders, specifically a military general from Iran. And specifically, the Secret Service knew before the July 13th rally that there was an Iranian plot to assassinate Donald Trump in revenge for his orders to kill that Iranian military commander in January 2020. Here's Representative Mike Turner of Ohio speaking to Secret Service Director Cheadle.
Director Cheadle, have you read the intelligence of the generalized threat to Donald Trump by Iran as a result of their desire to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani?
I have.
Have you read or been briefed about the intelligence of the specific recent threat to Donald Trump from Iran?
Yes, I have.
Director Wray, when we were getting our briefing, indicated that he thought the threat assessment should have included this threat from Iran. Is it your testimony today that the threat assessment, since you've read this intelligence, was sufficient to protect him from this threat from Iran?
My testimony today is that the information that we had at the time was known.
Was it sufficient? Director Cheadle, was it sufficient for the Iranian threat that you said you have read the intelligence briefings for?
That information was passed to...
Well, I'm not asking the bureaucratic issue of who did it get passed around to. Director Cheadle, was it sufficient for the specific and generalized threat to Donald Trump's life from Iran?
Yes, I do believe it was.
Director Cheadle, is an Iranian assassin more capable than a 20-year-old?
Sir, I think we've acknowledged that there was gaps and a failure that day.
And following up on that was Representative Pat Fallon of Texas.
So given that there was an increased threat to President Trump's life, was he provided a full security complement akin to what a sitting U.S. president would receive?
He was provided a full complement of security based on the threat assessment that we had.
That's not my question.
And the venue.
My question is, if he'd been the sitting president, would he have had the same security he had on July 13th, or would have been beefed up?
There is a difference between the sitting president
So your answer is he didn't.
and continuity of government and the responsibility that we have.
So he did not.
And so that's the testimony about the preparations made by law enforcement before the rally. And as you can hear, members of Congress were not exactly satisfied with the Secret Service director, basically implying that their preparations were sufficient based on the results. But it wasn't just law enforcement that was preparing for that rally. The shooter made some preparations that we now know about for the July 13th rally as well. And so here's FBI Director Christopher Wray testifying on Wednesday, July 24th to the House Judiciary Committee.
It does appear fairly clear that he was interested in public figures, kind of more broadly, and I think this is important, that starting somewhere around July 6th or so, he became very focused on former President Trump and this rally. And so one of the things that I can share here today that has not been shared yet is that we've just in the last couple of days found that from our review, to your point about devices, analysis of a laptop that the investigation ties to the shooter reveals that on July 6th, he did a Google search for, quote, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy? And so that's a search that obviously is significant in terms of his state of mind. That is the same day that it appears that he registered for the Butler rally.
And on top of that research, the shooter and his family had also bought themselves quite the arsenal.
We located a number of firearms associated with the shooter and his family. I think it was a total of, 14 in the house. The weapon that he used for the attempted assassination was an AR-style rifle that was purchased legally, that he, is my understanding, acquired, I think bought actually from his father, who was the one who originally bought it, again, legally. I'm told that the father purchased the firearm in 2013, so quite a while ago, and then he sold it to his son in October of 2023. He was a fairly avid, might be a little strong, but a fairly avid, shooting hobbyist. And so he went to, belonged to different sort of clubs and went to certain ranges and that kind of thing. We do believe, based on what we've seen so far, that he went to a shooting range the day before and that he shot an AR-style rifle at that range the day before. I'm not sure we know for sure that it's the weapon that he used, but I think we assessed that it probably is.
And on top of that target practice, the gun fetishing freak also did some scouting before the rally.
So again, with the caveat that we're continuing to do work on it, we believe that the first time he traveled to the grounds was, I think, a week before. And he spent roughly 20 minutes there. Then he went to the grounds again on the morning of the event, it appears, for about 70 minutes, I think. But again, I've qualified that. I'd have to go back and look to be sure of that part. And then he came back in the afternoon, so that would be, I guess, a third time for good. But that included things like this drone activity we just talked about.
Drone, you say? Well, here's FBI Director Wray responding to questions posed by Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio about this drone.
So we have recovered a drone that the shooter appears to have used. It's being exploited and analyzed by the FBI lab. The drone was recovered in his vehicle. So at the time of the shooting, the drone was in his vehicle with the controller. In addition, our investigation has uncovered.
Do you know what time of day he flew it, and if he flew it on the day of the shot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in addition, it appears that around 3:50 p.m., 4 o'clock in that window, on the day of the shooting, that the shooter was flying the drone around the area for about 11 minutes. I want to be clear, but when I say the area, not over the stage and that part of the area itself, but I would say about 200 yards, give or take, away from that. We think, but we do not know. So again, this is one of these things that's qualified because of our ongoing review, that he was live streaming, viewing the footage from that, again, about 11 minutes in around the 3:50, 4 o'clock p.m. range.
2 hours before, he's flying a drone in the vicinity of the rally.
About 200 yards away, yes.
And here's FBI Director Wray responding to questions posed by Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona.
There were no pictures or videos on the drone of the day of the rally, for example, but we have been able to reverse engineer the flight path of the drone from the day of the rally, and that's how we know that for about 11 minutes, from I think it's around 3:50 p.m. to 4 p.m., somewhere in that range, he was flying the drone, and we have the flight path. It's about 200 yards away from where former President Trump would ultimately be speaking. And so that would have primarily given him a vantage point. I'm trying to think how to describe this. If the former president's podium is that way, the drone would be over here looking, say 200 yards again off this way, looking back. So it would have shown the shooter, we think, again, we're still doing more work on this. I really want to qualify what I'm saying, but I'm trying to be transparent and lean in here. We think it would have shown him kind of what would have been behind him.
But when you say behind him, behind the shooter?
Correct. Like, in other words, almost like giving him a rear view mirror of the scene behind him, except again, he wasn't flying it overhead while he was later back for the assassination.
But he would have had, with the drone, he would have been able to also assess kind of what, because the stage, I assume, was already set, he would have been able to assess that angle with the rooftop as well, forward and backward, I assume.
Well, certainly going towards the towards the podium. Again, we're still trying to figure out exactly what he saw because we're having to, in effect, because there's no recording of what he saw during those 11 minutes, our hypothesis at this point, the experts think he would have been live streaming it. And so we're trying to, in effect, say, okay, well, if this was the flight pattern, given these capabilities of the drone, what would you have seen? What could you have seen for those 11 minutes? And again, it wasn't over the stage or the kind of the hub of the rally. It was about 200 yards away, but it looks like it would have been looking, let's say, length of a football field or so, more, kind of towards the podium.
And yet, despite him flying a drone around before the rally, no one noticed him until later that night at rally time. Here's Representative Jamie Raskin speaking to Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle.
It's been reported that before former President Trump got up on the stage at around 6 p.m. on Saturday, July 13th, that the local police had identified and even photographed a man who was acting suspiciously. And this man, who turned out to be the gunman, had been flagged as a potential threat. Is that accurate?
What I can say is that the individual was identified as suspicious.
So he was known to be suspicious before former President Trump took the stage.
That is the information I have received.
Why was he allowed to take the stage with a suspicious person having been identified in the crowd?
So I appreciate the question, and I'd like to make 2 points. If the detail had been past information that there was a threat, the detail would never have brought the former president out onto stage. That is what we do, and that is who we are. We are charged with protecting all of our protectees.
So you distinguish between someone who is suspicious and someone who's threatening, is that right?
I do. There are a number of times at protective events where suspicious people are identified, and those individuals have to be investigated and determined what is it that identifies that person as suspicious.
And here's Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris testifying the next day.
My understanding is that they identified Crooks for not matriculating. He never, to my knowledge, Crooks never made it through the secure perimeter into the venue space itself. He was identified by those members as suspicious, in part because of that. And then at some point, he produced the rangefinder, which heightened that suspicion.
Here's Representative Nick LaLota of New York questioning Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris.
Were there other folks who were also in the crowd identified as suspicious by law enforcement?
I have been briefed that, yes, there were multiple individuals, which would be consistent with normal operations for a detail like this that are identified as suspicious.
Can we take that as a single-digit number of other folks?
The number that I was briefed on was single-digit, but I can't say definitively that I was.
What number were you briefed on, Colonel?
Excuse me?
What number were you briefed on?
I believe I was briefed on an additional 3 individuals.
Here's Representative Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts questioning Secret Service Director Cheadle.
There were some reports that the individual had a rangefinder. That would certainly raise my suspicion. Did he have a rangefinder?
Yes, he did, but may I explain that at a number of our sites, especially when you're at outdoor venues, a rangefinder is not a prohibited item. It is sometimes an item that is brought in by individuals if you're going to be in the back.
Did anybody confront him on that? Anybody ask him questions? What are you doing with the rangefinder? Anybody confront him on his presence where he was in proximity to the president?
So again, to my knowledge, I believe that was the process that was taking place, was to locate the individual.
Did they confront him? Did they go up to him? Did they talk to him?
I do not have those details at this time.
Those are important details.
But Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Christopher Paris seemed to have plenty of details the very next day.
I believe, again, I'll defer to when the president came out. I know that was probably 20 to 25 minutes before 1811 hours. And steps were taken by the municipal officers over in that area they were actively looking for crooks. You saw the building yesterday. That's a pretty wide footprint. They began looking for him. There were scores of people making their way across that facility. Again, just for some context, there were over 100 people that day that necessitated or requiring medical attention due to the heat. There was a missing 6-year-old. This individual was deemed to be suspicious because he was walking around and not moving into the venue. The rangefinder obviously heightened that, and they were attempting to locate him as people were moving across that space who were attending the event to the secure perimeter.
And here's Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina following up with Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris.
The ESU, the Butler ESU officers who spotted Crooks, do I understand correctly they spotted him from the second floor of the AGR building?
That is my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay. Were they posted there in order to maintain overwatch on the roof, or were they generally assigned roving responsibility to be in the vicinity of that building?
I can't answer that, and I would defer to the Secret Service.
And now here's Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia asking some surprisingly useful questions to Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris before, of course, she turned back into a partisan monster.
No, emergency services noticed Thomas Crooks on the roof. This is the timeline that we have. Took a picture and reported it. Who did they send that picture to?
Just to be clear, they were posted in the AGR building and took a picture of him. That's what you're.
Yes. Who did they send the picture to?
So I only know from interviews what I can confirm to my knowledge and belief here today that a member of Pennsylvania State Police inside of the command post received that information telephonically and by text, relayed it to the Secret Service, and then was given a number to follow up on. And that was based, again, heightened suspicion.
How did they relay it to Secret Service?
I believe that they verbally turned and said in the command post, this is information that I just received. And then in follow-up to that, as directed from the interview that I was briefed on, that was forwarded by text as requested by the Secret Service.
And so now let's go back to Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina for more of his questions to Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris.
So are you then saying that, to your knowledge, those ESU officers left the location where they could look out the window to go in search of this person?
That is my understanding.
Sometime before the time between the time he was spotted on the ground and identified as someone suspicious until the shooting, they had left that post to go look for him. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding is yes, along with other municipal officers that responded to that area. And that's based on interviews that we've conducted, and I want to be very clear that I don't want to establish a timeline minute by minute because we don't have that yet.
And so the Butler ESU officers left their post, and I think that's going to be a key detail here. But moving on, here's Representative Mark Green of Tennessee continuing the conversation with Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris.
Was Secret Service notified that they were leaving to go look for this guy, and thus those eyes on top of the building not?
I do not know, and the other thing that I do not know is where else Butler ESU sent that information. I have not been briefed on that.
Who told them to go look? Do you know if they were told to go look?
I do not know, sir.
We just know that they did go look.
Yes, sir. And I said a very concerted effort with all of those alcoves and all of those buildings was made. There were 2 additional officers who, I don't know the specifics of the timeline. I don't know the specifics of the logistics of how that information was relayed, but I'm briefed that they came and they made a very concerted effort to try and locate Crooks.
But Crooks was on the roof of the AGR building. Here's Representative Tom Massey of Kentucky asking FBI Director Chris Wray how the little twerp got up there.
You mentioned that the would-be assassin bought a 5-foot ladder. You have credit card evidence of that. But it looks like on the scene there was a larger ladder that he might have used. Do you know which ladder he used to get to the roof? And do you have possession of that 5-foot ladder and the other ladder? And do you know how the taller ladder got to the scene?
So this whole business about the ladder is something we're drilling into more. We do have possession of the 5-foot ladder that he purchased close in time to his attempted assassination. That we've traced the purchase of that ladder from a receipt, a bloodied receipt that he had on him at the time his body was recovered on the roof. We do not yet know for sure how exactly he got up on the roof. We're looking at, various forensic pieces to try to kind of piece that together. So more to come on that.
Do you know where the 5-foot ladder was found or retrieved? Was it near the roof or was it still in his vehicle?
Neither. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that it was not. I know that it was not on scene, and I know that it was not in his vehicle. We now believe that the subject climbed onto the roof using some mechanical equipment on the ground and vertical piping on the side of the AGR building. In other words, we do not believe he used a ladder to get up there. The reason why I've talked about how we think he got on the roof is that's based on forensic, our evidence response team and forensic analysis that we're, without getting into all the details, footprints and things like that, that we can, fingerprints, et cetera, that we can see how he got on. But we don't have an eyewitness at the moment who saw him climbing up.
And so now, getting back to what law enforcement was doing once Crooks was on the roof, here's Representative Dan Goldman of New York speaking to Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Christopher Paris.
You said that many of your officers or Butler ESU officers were looking for Crooks. That was after that photograph was relayed to the Secret Service?
My understanding was after the photo was relayed to the our trooper in the command post, and yes, Crooks was in that area around the building. My understanding is 2 additional municipal officers who were on a different post responded to that area, and they began actively looking for Crooks. They circumvented, or they circumscribed the building to try and locate him. It became apparent at some point that he was up on the roof. Those 2 municipal officers who responded then, to their credit, actively, once they realized that he was on the roof, one boosted the other one up, hanging from the ledge of the roof. By the time that officer was boosted up on top of the roof, Crooks was on it, almost in that final position that you saw. He had the AR out, and he pointed it at the municipal officer who, suspended from the roof, was not in a position, feet dangling at that point, to draw a weapon or continue hoisting himself back up on the roof. He drops back down from the roof, and at this point, I believe that's when the video that's been widely circulated with people filming Crooks up on the roof, saying there's somebody up on the roof. There were other law enforcement around the building running, but their vantage point on the ground did not lend a clear line of sight to where Crooks was at the top of that building. The municipal officer saw Crooks, Crooks saw him, and Crooks turned and leveled the gun at him in a position tactically of extreme disadvantage, suspended, in the air with your legs dangling after somebody had boosted you up.
And he let go, right?
He let go and he fell back down.
And then Pennsylvania State Police Colonel Paris continued to give information to Representative Mark Green of Tennessee.
My understanding is the 2 officers that responded and one hoisted up the second one were not part of Butler ESU. They were 2 separate municipal officers who were tasked with a different responsibility. I would speculate as an example to say a traffic post or a...
Understood.
And they responded. I don't know, again, the specifics as to how they were alerted, but just to be clear, they were 2 separate. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And to summarize the situation, in the moments before the shooting, here's FBI Director Chris Wray answering Representative Barry Moore of Alabama's questions.
So a few minutes before the shooting, local law enforcement saw him on the roof. Again, no weapon identified at that point. A few seconds before the shooting is when the law enforcement officer that I've talked about already is the one who was assisted by another officer who saw up on the roof, saw the shooter in a prone shooting position with the gun. He turns.
How long did that happen before?
That was that sighting. That is the first time, to my knowledge, the first time anybody from law enforcement saw him with a weapon. That is seconds before he shot at President Trump.
Which was one of the few details that was confirmed by Secret Service Director Cheadle, answering a question posed by Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland.
So the Secret Service did not know that the gunman actually had a weapon before President Trump was allowed to get up on the stage?
To the best of our knowledge and the facts that we have at this point, that is correct.
How is that possible? Well, here's FBI Director Chris Wray.
The weapon had a collapsible stock, which could explain why it might have been less easy for people to observe. Because one of the things that we're finding is people have observed him. The first people to observe him with the weapon were when he was already on the roof, and we haven't yet found anybody with firsthand observation of him with the weapon walking around beforehand.
So Secret Service didn't know that he had the weapon. But some members of Congress think that there were still more than enough warnings. Here's Representative Raha Krishnamurthy of Illinois grilling Secret Service Director Cheadle.
As you know, the shooter began shooting at 6:11 p.m. Eastern on July 13th. NBC reported that at 5:51 p.m., 20 minutes before the shooting began, the state police informed the Secret Service of their concern. Now, the rally was not paused at that point, correct?
No.
And according to NBC, just 2 minutes later, at 5:53 p.m., the Secret Service notified its snipers about the gunman. The rally wasn't paused at that point either, correct?
No.
Let me show you some video footage by rally goers. If you could play the video on the screen up here. This was taken 2 minutes before the shooting started. If you could turn up the volume.
Criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
Right on the roof.
It's much tougher than it happens.
You went right on the roof, big guy.
Up here. Ma'am, that doesn't look like suspicious behavior. That looks like threatening behavior to me. And the rally wasn't paused at that point either, correct?
I can tell you, as I stated earlier, sir, that the moment that the shift surrounding the president were aware of an actual threat.
That's a threat right there. The guy's on the roof and everybody's yelling at him.
Yes.
And directing the officer's attention to him. The rally was not paused at that point, correct?
We are currently still combing through communications and when communications were passed.
Well, I can point you to this communication. It's 2 minutes before the shots started ringing out. Director Cheadle, yes or no? Was there ever a moment where the Secret Service actually considered pausing the rally?
The Secret Service would have paused the rally had they known or been
So the
told
answer is
there
no.
was an actual threat.
The answer is no. Correct?
I can speak to you in generalities.
No, I don't want generalities. I want
all
specifics.
of the communications.
The answer is no. You did not consider pausing the rally, correct?
The people that are in charge of protecting the president on that day would never bring the former president out if there was a threat that had been identified.
Well, they did, because we've now identified 3 points in the 20 minutes before the shooting that the threat emerged.
It does seem like who knew what and when is a key issue in this investigation. Communications do seem to be a key issue here, because 2 minutes does seem like enough time for local cops to communicate a threat to the Secret Service snipers, if their only option wasn't to play an old school game of telephone. But those 2 minutes were wasted, and the shooter got to take his shots. Here's FBI Director Chris Wray.
We have recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
And now we know how he was prohibited from firing off a 9th.
I know it was the Secret Service counter sniper who took the shot that eliminated the shooter.
But just because Crooks died, that doesn't mean that his plans were complete. Here's Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio speaking to FBI Director Chris Wray.
What about the bombs that we've heard about in the shooter's car?
So again, the FBI lab is exploiting those explosive devices.
Yep.
There were, we've recovered 3 devices, 2 in his vehicle and 1 back in his residence.
Are these what you would call, your experts would call sophisticated operations, or this? I don't know. That's what I've been told by people who have some understanding of this area.
Yeah, I think it's. We've seen more sophisticated and less. I would say these are relatively, again, keyword relatively crude devices themselves, but they did have the ability to be detonated remotely. And so to that point, in addition to the 2 devices that we recovered out of his vehicle, there were receivers for those to explosive devices with the devices. And then on the shooter himself, when he was killed by law enforcement, he had a transmitter with him. Now, I do want to add one important point here, is at the moment, it looks to us, again, ongoing review, and I can't say that too many times. At a moment, it looks like because of the on-off position on the receivers, that if he had tried to detonate those devices from the roof, it would not have worked. But that doesn't mean the explosives weren't dangerous.
And as for why Crooks had these deadly plans, here's FBI Director Wray.
I think it's fair to say that we do not yet have a clear picture of his motive.
But now that he's dead, the threat he poses appears to also be gone. Here's Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina speaking to FBI Director Chris Wray.
Have you developed any evidence to so suggest that there are any accomplices or cooperators or assisters?
Not at this time, but again, the investigation's ongoing. From everything we've seen, which is consistent with what we've learned in interviews, a lot of people describe him as a loner. That does kind of fit with what we're seeing in his devices. His list of contacts, for example, is very short, compared to what you would normally see from most people. So it doesn't appear to be a whole lot of interaction between him, face-to-face or digital with a lot of people.
And just to put some of these theories to rest, here's Representative Raha Krishnamurthy of Illinois questioning Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle.
First, you have not found evidence that the incident was a staged shooting, right?
Correct.
And you haven't found evidence that this was a result of a conspiracy of high-ranking government officials, correct?
Correct.
And you have not found evidence that this incident was in fact directed or perpetrated by a foreign state or entity, right?
And that's the last question, but I'll let the director answer that, please.
Not at this time.
So there you go. Also in the hearings, we learned about some actions taken by law enforcement right after the shooting. So first, here's how they figured out who the shooter was. Here's Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland speaking to Secret Service Director Cheadle.
It's been reported that the shooter was not carrying a driver's license or any form of identification. They had no idea who he was, but then he was quickly identified, I think within 30 minutes, by using the serial number on the AR-15 under a tracing system that is now controversial. Some people say we should get rid of it. Some people want to keep it. But is that right that the serial number was the key information which led to the identification of the shooter?
That is my understanding, sir, yes.
And jumping onto my soapbox for just a quick second here, if gun lovers want to allow one family of weirdos to be able to legally own 14 guns, if they want to allow family traditions that include fathers teaching their loner sons to accurately murder from a distance, the least that gun lovers could do is take responsibility for their weapons and allow for some basic accountability, which a gun tracing system provides. Gun lovers all say it's all about personal responsibility when a gun is used to kill someone, or a lot of someone's, or a classroom full of child someone's. But they fight against being personally responsible for their own guns and having to register them. But I think that we should remember that the gun tracing system came in handy during this investigation. Because if Crooks hadn't acted alone, being able to identify him by his weapon quickly might have saved a lot of lives. But back to the hearing, jumping off the soapbox. As for the Secret Service, here's what Director Cheadle did in the immediate aftermath of the shooting.
Immediately following the assassination attempt, I directed the activation of my crisis center. I assembled my executive team to begin surging more protective resources to the former president and to ensure the wellness of our people post-incident, all while securing an active crime scene. I immediately ordered a reevaluation of the Republican National Convention security plan, and I increased the security posture in the National Capital Region for all permanent protectees and sites. At the same time, I initiated a mission assurance investigation within our agency.
But here are some things that she didn't do after the shooting. Here's Representative Pete Sessions of Texas questioning Secret Service Director Cheadle.
Have any employees been disciplined for their role in Butler, PA incident?
No, sir, not at this time. I am asking those questions.
And here's Representative Pat Fallon of Texas speaking to Secret Service Director Cheadle.
Have you visited the site?
No, I have not.
which boggles my mind. A former president of the United States almost has his head blown off on your watch at a campaign rally with more than 3 months and God only knows how many more campaign events to go before an election, and she didn't go to the site to learn firsthand what went wrong? As the person in charge, she should have been on the first plane to Butler, Pennsylvania. There's even a small runway next to the event site that she could have landed a private plane on. She should have been there within hours. You know, the Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner knew to stop what he was doing and get his ass over there. Even the members of the House Homeland Security Committee got their asses on a plane. But the Secret Service director didn't after 9 days? That alone made me extremely skeptical of her leadership. But there's more. In fact, I have so many examples that this segment could be a whole episode in its own right. But here's the worst of it when it comes to Director Cheadle. So first, 3 days after the shooting, she gave an interview to ABC News, and in it, when asked why there were no Secret Service agents on the roof of the AGR building, considering that it had a direct line of sight to Donald Trump's big orange bean, she said, quote, "That building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point. And so there's a safety factor that would be considered there that we wouldn't want to put someone up on a sloped roof. And so the decision was made to secure the building from inside," unquote. Which is a rationale that she apparently pulled directly out of her ass. Here's Representative Pat Fallon of Texas speaking to Director Cheadle.
So you said, do you remember in an ABC interview you did that you didn't have people on the roof of the AGR building because you were worried about safety because of the slope?
I recall that statement.
Okay. Does the Secret Service have written policy you can share with us about slope roofs?
No.
Not that it would have mattered in this case anyway. Here's Representative Mark Green of Tennessee speaking to Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner Christopher Paris, who did go to the site and see the place with his own eyes.
The slope of the roof, would that have prevented a sniper from being up there?
I don't believe so, sir.
Okay.
Didn't prevent a 20-year-old assassin from being up there. And I saw proof of that myself. Members of the House Homeland Security Committee, and let's keep in mind that this Congress resembles an assisted living facility. Well, I saw video of members of Congress walking around on that roof in their videos. They didn't even need to hold on to anything. And so the idea that the slope of the roof had anything prohibitive about it is pure bullshit. Also in the hearings, she straight up refused to answer basic questions that were answered with no hesitation by both the Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner and FBI Director over the course of the following 2 days. And so just check out this exchange. This one's really something. Here's Representative Lisa McLean of Michigan speaking to Director Cheadle.
Have you been in communication with the FBI?
Yes, I have.
With whom?
I speak with the director and the deputy director.
Okay. And what have they shared with you about this investigation? So I'll give you an opportunity to answer again. Did they share with you how many shell casings were on the roof?
They have shared with me the evidence.
Did they share with you how many shell casing were on the roof?
Yes.
Okay, how many were there?
I would refer to the FBI for
how many were there?
And their information that they need to share in their investigation.
So they've shared the information with you. You just don't want to share the information with us.
The answer was 8. We heard it. It was 8. There was no reason that she had to hold that information back from Congress. And when members of Congress, after hours of getting their basic questions dodged like that, asked when she could give them answers, this is what she said. Here's Chairman of the committee, James Comer of Kentucky, speaking to Secret Service Director Cheadle.
It's been 9 days. Every American wants these questions answered. Do you have a ballpark estimate of what Mr. Sessions asked you would be able to answer?
So I can
time-wise?
I can tell you on our mission assurance, internal investigation, we are targeting to have that completed within 60 days.
60 days. To which Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York immediately responded.
Director Cheadle, respectfully, what you had just laid out about 60 days, we are currently in the midst of an especially concentrated presidential campaign in the moment. That is also paired with of course, elections happening across the country that are happening in about 100 days. So the notion of a report coming out in 60 days when the threat environment is so high in the United States, irrespective of party, is not acceptable.
And I have to admit, because I'm a perpetual child, that the entire time I was watching this hearing with someone with the last name Cheadle, I kept thinking of this scene from the classic film Grandma's Boy.
Where do you get your weed?
From you, Dante.
Oh, yeah. What's up, Mr. Teasel?
But by the end of the hearing, I was wishing that Mr. Cheadle, the stoner hippie video game company executive, was the man in charge of the Secret Service, because our Secret Service would have been in more capable hands. During this hearing, members of Congress, whose lives are quite literally in the hands of Secret Service, demanded that Kimberly Cheadle resign, and throughout the hearing, over and over again, she refused. And I've watched a lot of hearings where grandstanding politicians demand resignations from officials, especially when they know that the hearing is going to be must-see C-SPAN like this hearing was. But this one was different. This time, the demands were bipartisan, and this time, I believe they were totally warranted. Kimberly Cheadle had to go. And the next day, she resigned. And good riddance. But even with new leadership, it's clear that changes need to be made. And so here are some obvious changes that are needed, starting with staffing. Here's now former Secret Service Director Cheadle speaking to Representative Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts.
As of today, the Secret Service has just over 8,000 employees. We continue to hire, knowing that we need to ensure that we keep pace with
What would be the full complement of...
And gentlemen, time's expired, but please answer the question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
What would be the full complement that you're looking for? You've got 8,000, and how many would be a full complement for the service?
So we are still striving towards a number of 9,500 employees approximately in order to be able to meet future and emerging needs.
Okay.
And so clearly, Secret Service needs to be fully staffed. And then bigger picture, we also clearly need FirstNet. Because the game of telephone they were playing, where local law enforcement uses one kind of equipment and Secret Service agents use their own kind of equipment, and the connection between them is literally two dudes standing in a room, that is some low-tech that just can't be how we do communications in 2024. And we were promised that they wouldn't be. Now, I know we're jumping into the Wayback Machine here because my episode on FirstNet was released in 2017. But in that episode, in those hearings, we learned that AT&T was given a huge contract for FirstNet, the First Responder Network Authority. FirstNet was created by Congress in 2012 because we learned via 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina and other disasters that first responders and other law enforcement need to be able to talk to one another using the same equipment. So here's some testimony about what happened on 9/11. This is when we first learned this lesson on a big stage. Here's Timothy Romer. He was a member of the 9/11 Commission, and here he is testifying to Congress on September 29th, 2005.
Let me give you a couple examples of what the 9/11 Commission found as to some of these problems. We found all kinds of compelling instances of bravery and courage, people going into burning buildings and rescuing people. They might have rescued more. We might have saved more of the fire department chiefs, officers, police officers, emergency personnel, if they would have had public radio spectrum to better communicate. At 9:59 in the morning on 9/11, 4 years ago, a general evacuation order was given to firefighters in the North Tower. The South Tower had collapsed. A place that held up to 25,000 people had been diminished to cement, steel, and ash. The people then in the North Tower, many of the chiefs in the lobby didn't even know that the other tower had collapsed. Or else they might have been able to get more people out more quickly. We had comments from people saying such things as, "We didn't know it had collapsed." Somebody actually said, Mr. Chairman, that people watching TV had more information than we did in the lobby on 9/11 in the North Tower. People on TV in Florida or California knew more than our first responders on site in New York City.
The first responders didn't know. They didn't know the tower collapsed. Just like the Secret Service on July 13th didn't know that Crooks was on the roof with a gun for 2 minutes, which were being recorded on video by MAGA on the ground. And this was discussed in the hearing with local police, with a witness that you haven't heard from yet. And so here's Mark Green of Tennessee with an introduction.
Mr. Patrick Yos currently serves as the President, National Fraternal Order of Police. In this role, Mr. Yos leads the order and its more than 367,000 law enforcement members in representing police officers and the profession. Prior to taking his current role, Mr. Yos served an impressive 36 years as an active law enforcement officer.
And here's Representative Benny Thompson of whatever state's abbreviation is MS. Mississippi, Missouri, I don't know, doesn't matter. This isn't about him. This is Benny Thompson's conversation with Officer Yos.
President Yos, in your comments, you talked about the need for communication. You talked about FirstNet. And so we have federal, state, and local law enforcement at an event like what we're talking about in Butler. But in our conversation with some of the locals, not state police, but the sheriff's department and the chief of police in Butler yesterday, those individuals did not have communication with actually state police or Secret Service. Would that, in your professional opinion, be a vulnerability for managing an event like this?
Well, I think we can go back to 9/11 when we identified at that time that the interoperability of different agencies to be able to communicate really was a hindrance. There's an infrastructure in place now to address these interoperabilities, but at the same time, they're not always utilized in every event. I do not have any direct knowledge whether that was the issue here, but I can tell you it is a common issue in law enforcement and an ability for our agencies not to be able to communicate. Not that the technology is not necessarily there, it's because that they're not always incorporated.
And so here's the most obvious conclusion ever from Representative Benny Thompson of wherever he's from.
Yeah. You know, we passed legislation mandating obviously FirstNet interoperability, and we tied funding to make sure that that happened. But here we are looking at this situation, and we picked up some valuable information that we're still not where we need to be on that.
You think? FirstNet was created by Congress in 2012. It's been 12 years. And so how is it possible that law enforcement agencies are still communicating with each other via two dudes in a room? This was the vision of FirstNet that we were promised. Here's Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii explaining what we should expect with FirstNet, and this was way back in 2017.
With FirstNet, firefighters will be able to download the blueprint of a burning building before they enter. A police officer arriving at a scene can run a background check or get pictures of a suspect by accessing a federal law enforcement database. Most importantly, emergency personnel will not be competing with commercial users for bandwidth. They will have priority on this network, which will be built and hardened to public safety specifications. It will have ruggedized and competitive devices and specify public safety applications.
That was the promise. And so I'm sitting here in 2024 wondering how is it possible that in an age of mass communication, when we all have supercomputers in our pockets, that the picture of Crooks wasn't blasted to the phones of every single law enforcement officer on site? How is it possible that there isn't one channel that everyone can use, or at least channels that work across agencies? Let's get back to Patrick Yos, the national president of the Fraternal Order of Police.
There's no doubt when you look at how many people are involved in an operation like this, having everyone on one channel is difficult. But there are people within contained areas, and their ability to be able to communicate as things change across platforms is crucial. In this case, we know that in seconds, things unfolded, and in seconds, getting meaningful communication out to people who might be able to act on that communication is vital. So I think there's avenues here. I agree that not everyone should be on the same channel, but there are certain people within certain areas and perimeters that should be having communication or the ability to communicate a little more freer.
All of this is so basic. And what's infuriating is that it's been a known problem in our law enforcement capabilities for at least 23 years, since 9/11. And yet here we go again. And so that needs to be solved, and it needs to be done yesterday. And other than that, there is going to be a new investigation in Congress. It was approved unanimously in the House this week, and so we will get more details. And of course, the FBI and Secret Service are still investigating. And if they discover anything that's substantially different or revelatory, I'll follow up on this episode. But for now, the shooter's dead, the Secret Service is understaffed, and our first responder networks are still disconnected. And so do with that information whatever you will. And please share this episode with anyone you know who cares. Okay, so I've been working on this episode nonstop for the last 4 days, and because we did this so quickly, my sister was not prepared to do the accounting needed to figure out who our new executive producers are, so I have no one to announce for this episode. But if you would like to be our executive producer on any episode of your choice, all you have to do is provide $535 total dollars, so it doesn't have to be all at once. You can do it, $5 by $5, as many people have done on Patreon or PayPal, however it works for you. But once you hit $535, then you get to become an executive producer, put your vouch on an episode, and that helps move that episode up the most valuable episodes list, which new listeners use all the time to figure out which episodes you consider the most valuable because you were willing to pay for them. What a month. I was just looking at my calendar and I played in a volleyball tournament on July 4th, and that feels like it happened 6 months ago. This month has been insane. First the Supreme Court gave presidents immunity from prosecution just in time for us to celebrate the 4th of July and our independence from the immunity of kings. And then the week after that, I finished the Boeing episode. And then I played 3 days of volleyball, during which Trump was almost assassinated. And then 2 days after that, I went to the RNC and got way outside my comfort zone by being at the Republican National Convention full of MAGA and world-dominating elites. And I also interviewed 5 members of Congress, which scared the shit out of me. And then I did a bonus episode about that before running off to the We're Not Wrong live show. And on that live show, by the way, I predicted that Biden would drop out and that Kamala would be anointed by the Democrats. And before that episode even came out to the public, Biden dropped out and Kamala was anointed by the Dems. I feel like a wizard, and I had a very accurate crystal ball. And now Justin Robert Young owes me a steak. Ka-ching! But yeah, Kamala is now going to be the nominee. No democracy required. So that's fun. And then this week, I produced this episode on the Trump assassination attempt while a mass murderer spoke to our Congress and had to pause his speech over 50 times to wait for our representatives to stop applauding. And the mass murderer I'm referring to is Benjamin Netanyahu, if you're unaware. And by the way, The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals in the world, recently estimated that the true death toll in Gaza since October 8th is closer to 186,000 human beings, which is more than the 39,000 approximately that is being cited most everywhere right now, a number that has absurdly barely budged in the last 6 months despite daily mass murders of Gazans by Israeli bombs. And that number doesn't even bother to count the deaths by disease and forced starvation and the lack of any fully functioning hospitals left to treat any of it. This still is going on. And so basically what I'm saying is, it's been a month. And none of this indicates that we are living in a healthy, moral, democratic country. But that's not exactly breaking news. What is breaking news is that the House of Representatives, under the leadership of political no one, Mike Johnson, has decided that they have done such a great job doing nothing this year that they get to go home for their August campaigning vacation a week early, despite the House of Representatives only having finished 5 of the 12 government funding bills, which are supposed to be done, like done, like passed the Senate and signed by Biden by September 30th. Well, none of them are done. And so the House has only just begun 5 of them. And this is notable because Mike Johnson promised that the House would not get to just fuck off for vacation in August until all 12 had been passed. But apparently, getting not even halfway there felt like enough. And it's not like Americans are paying any attention to Congress with all of the presidential drama sucking up all the attention of a lazy media that never pays attention to Congress. So who's going to hold him accountable for breaking that promise? No one. Probably no one, because these people keep getting reelected no matter how bad of a job they do. And so basically what I'm saying is everything's great. I might as well just retire now since everything in this country is going so well. And I am going to retire for a week. And then I'll be back with some episodes that we've actually been working on for a long time. So we're not going dark in August, unlike your Congress. And I am going to be going to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where I do intend to interview more members of Congress. And I'm hoping it won't be quite so scary this time since I've already done a few weeks ago. But yeah, the DNC too. Not only did they just anoint Kamala out of nowhere, but they've also decided that they're going to have a virtual roll call of delegates before we even get there. So I was under the impression that the point of the convention was for the delegates to all gather in the same room and officially nominate their candidate. But if they're doing it over Zoom before the convention, like why even have a convention? I'm really wondering, like, why are we doing this? What's the point of going if it's all going to be finished before anybody shows up? Also, I found out that the Democrats, in their infinite wisdom, decided that the convention is going to be in 2 different locations, miles apart, with no direct public transportation route between them. Which I guess is fine for the vast majority of, members of Congress and their billionaire donors. And, a lot of their billionaire donors are also delegates. And so these people have private drivers and corporate credit cards to charge their Ubers on. But I'm genuinely afraid that my Uber bill could go up into the hundreds over the course of those 4 days if I have to go back and forth. Fucking Democrats, man. They do everything the stupid way. The only thing that I'm truly looking forward to about that trip right now, to be completely honest with you, keeping in mind that I'm still exhausted in mind, body, and soul from the Republican convention, and so I'll probably gear up for this over the course of the next couple weeks. But the one thing that even now I'm stoked for is our We're Not Wrong live show. And we don't have a location for you yet, but I can tell you that it's going to be in Chicago on Sunday, August 18th, which is the night before the convention starts, because Justin's wife is super pregnant. And so we're trying to get this live show done before she pops. And so I'll let you know when tickets go on sale for that. But I do love meeting you guys in person. It was the highlight of my Wisconsin trip. And this audience and the We're Not Wrong audience is full of such good people who are smart and generous and funny. And I just really enjoy spending time with you. It makes me feel much less alone in this job that feels quite lonely, like 99% of the time. But yeah, point is, there's no August recess for me. And so if you want to support me and my expected outrageous Uber bills in Chicago, please pay for this show, because as much as I enjoy meeting you in person, we've actually never once broken even on one of our live shows. They cost us money every single time, which is fine for now. We love doing them, but I could still use some financial help to cover these convention trips. But yeah, enough of that. I have to run along and go get a mammogram in memory of Shannon Doherty, because I loved Brenda. I was also a brunette who moved into Southern California, into a sea of blondes, and always felt like a fish out of water. And so I loved Brenda Walsh, and I loved Shannon Doherty. I was a big fan of her podcast, so I'm very sad that she's gone, but I'm going to learn her lesson and get a mammogram today. So with lots of love and soon to be sore tits, I bid you adieu until next time. Mwah. Talk to you later.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, in the end will justify the means.
the polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.